Welcome, everybody, to Studio Visit, episode 8 with Raven. I'm Raven, your host. Thank you for being with us. I'm here with a special guest, as I do every week. Very excited to welcome Anthony, MountVitruvius, MV, as most people call him, onto the podcast. A art blocks curator artist, a generative artist, someone who I think is your style is extremely energetic. I would describe it as definitely someone who I looked like when generative art and I I saw you kind of your art blocks pieces and things like that. I'm always like, okay, this is like up my alley as far as generative art. I think we have similar inspirations, what I want to talk about. We actually haven't talked, like we saw each other in Marfa, but I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We kind of saved it for this podcast. So welcome, Anthony, to Studio Visit.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it was really great to meet you in Marfa, and you're right. I don't think we've chatted since. So yeah, it's awesome to be here. I've really liked the episode so far. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Yeah. So I want to jump right into kind of just start with your background, right? Like, where did you end up growing up? Like, where did you, tell me that story. Like, what was your, childhood like? Were you into art in the beginning of your life, or was that a later thing?
It's a good question. I think I was lucky enough to grow up in a pretty creative household. My mum was a fashion designer, so she would make, and design her own clothes, and she really cared a lot about the sort of end-to-end process of that. So everything from, literally end-to-end. We're talking starting with the sheep, right? Wow. So we actually had sheep on the farm for a while.
No way.
Yeah. And it was also that she could get the kind of perfect wool for the garments. And, she cared so much about the process of the dyeing. And she had these huge sort of electronically controlled knitting machines. This is, some of my earliest memories. And I really vividly remember, the reels of paper that she'd sort of mark all of the little squares of how the stitches were going to operate and sort of feed them through this machine. And, it was a little bit like very rudimentary programming. I don't think there was any kind of digital intelligence inside the machines itself, but it really would just kind of follow these instructions that she would give it, and how it would come these beautiful garments. And, it was really cool to kind of sit, I think, and watch her go through that whole process of thinking about what it was she wanted to create, everything from sketching it through to thinking about the materials and each sort of little step in the process. So I think that, I don't think I really appreciated it at the time, how influential that was to me. It's only something I think I recognized much later, that I really cared quite deeply about every part of the process that I was going through with the things that I was doing. So I would say that was, pretty foundational. It's not classic art, that's for sure, but there's there was that kind of creative sort of atmosphere, I think, to the house. And I think that very much helped me when I started looking at sort of early computers. Like, I grew up, I'm nearly 40, believe it or not. I'm going to be 40 in January.
Wow, so you don't look it. I wouldn't guess that. I would guess I'm 36. I would guess that you were younger than me. So,
oh, dude, I appreciate that. I'll come back on this podcast whenever you want.
That's how I get guests, ladies and gentlemen.
That's it. Yeah, so when I was growing up, there was this kind of time where the UK government was doing this program where they put BBC computers. I don't know if you had the BBC Micro in America, but it was kind of like, think of something like a Commodore 64.
After the Revolution, we don't watch anything from the British. No, I'm just kidding.
No, yeah, I don't think any other country had it, right? So yeah, it was this time where kind of, computers were being sort of forced into schools, and it was really great, right? Because off the back of that, loads of people learned to program, loads of people learned, games companies came out the back of that. And in the UK, we sort of had this explosion like 20 years later of really great technical engineering. So games That's companies awesome. Started, we ended up making things like Grand Theft Auto and things like that. Not me personally, I had nothing to do with that, but, it was all because of that program. So I think, even though I went to this tiny little school in the middle of the countryside, we still had access to that stuff. So it was really inspiring for me to be able to kind of go, oh, let me type, line 10, Anthony is awesome, go to 10, right? And then just
Nice.
scroll the text down the screen when I was
And
sort of 6,
what
7
part
years old.
of England did you grow up in? England or somewhere else in
Yeah.
Great Britain?
I grew up in the UK, so it's a place called Somerset.
Okay, great. Are
Which
you
is
impressed that I don't think that the UK is only England?
I'm very impressed. Very impressed.
I feel like if you ask 10 Americans, that they probably, like, 9 of them would get that question wrong. Unfortunately.
That's fair. I think I get that question wrong half the time. The place I grew up was a place called Somerset. Think very rural. It was mostly farms. Like I had, our closest house was 2 fields away. So, in terms of my social experience growing up, I would say it was pretty limited. There weren't many people that were my age. But I had a computer and loads of space on the farm. So, I'd drive cars and then make stuff on the computer. That was kind of my upbringing. It was enjoyable. And so, having that experience, I think, of getting kind of early access to computers and then getting that bug of, wow, okay, you can do some really interesting things with these. And like those early computer systems are just still really exciting to me. Like I actually collect old computer systems just because I love the simplicity of them. I even think of kind of, you take a Commodore 64 and Commodore 64 Basic or, any of those old systems. It's almost like a rudimentary graphics API that you would use. It's almost like, similar kind of abstraction as you'd think of in something like P5, right? It's just a very simple way to make procedural things happen on a computer. And it was just such a wonderful foundation into learning programming for me. And so after kind of getting that experience, I then started looking at, we've got this really old PC at home. It was like a 256, like had 2 floppy drives, no hard drive, super ancient thing, like DOS. And so I just suddenly, decided, okay, well, I'm going to try and learn how this thing works. And, started working with Microsoft Basic as like one of my first languages. And I think, in the back of my mind, I was always kind of trying to apply that thing that I think I saw my mum do, which was really understand how this machine works and why do these elements all kind of come together. And so, a few years on from that, I started getting more into kind of writing music software. And that was kind of really the first proper programming, I would say, that I really did. And I actually stayed in music for quite a few years. So I ended up writing things like granular synthesis engines and, super gnarly real-time audio stuff, which I absolutely loved doing. And I think the reason that I loved the computer as like a tool was that you could make something that just felt very different to any other medium, right? It felt like to make sound on a computer using, the sort of purely digital DSP kind of approach. It makes these kind of very different textural sort of qualities and different, like you can almost make anything with it. But naturally you end up sort of gravitating towards these sort of slightly different ways of representing things. And I found that just so fascinating. And so I think that kind of kickstarted my mindset when I think about, I guess, my practice in general, which is the more I can understand kind of how the machine works, the better I can kind of apply myself and the better I can kind of free myself from the constraints of what it is that I've got in my head. And so that's sort of been a sort of underlying theme throughout my whole life, really. It's just been saying, hey, look, if you want to design, if you want to do art, if you want to, make anything, if you truly understand how to manipulate a computer, you can get it to do whatever you want. And it can be the most unbelievably creative tool you can imagine. So a lot of the time it's just, me getting that technical barrier out of the way so that I can just focus on making this thing that I want to do.
When you were making music software, did you make music as well? Like, were you into music at that time? Like, did you learn instruments? Do you learn how to make music? Was that your...
Yeah. I made quite a lot of music. I also started a record label when I was about 18 and it failed miserably because everyone was just downloading all the music on Kazaa, I think, or something at the time. And Yeah, we had a small label. There's quite a good group of us that were making audio, and some of the people, you know, I was making music with are still my really good friends today, which is really nice. A couple of them have done amazingly well, which has been, you know, awesome to see. But I think, you know, it's funny because when I talk about my artwork, people are like, "Oh, you use a lot of music references." You know, when you
Yeah.
talk about algorithms or when you talk about the way that you're thinking about something, and I think that's why, because I still think in that format quite a lot, and there's a lot of crossover between sort of the visual arts and sort of sound programming in a sense,
Mm.
like DSP and how we work with things in you know, data and textures, and you know how we manipulate data in the way that we're sort of trying to represent it. There's a lot of crossover between those things.
Yeah, for sure, and it's really interesting. So, did you have a particular genre you were doing music in, or was it did you that you really enjoyed making music?
Yeah, so I mean, going back to that whole theme of stuff that you could do with a computer that you kind of couldn't in any other way. I was really into. It was kind of. I think it started out as like a UK sort of thing. There's a genre called IDM. Just a bit of a wanky name called intelligent dance music, but really all it meant was kind of like electronica as jazz in a sense.
Mm,
So you were kind of
cool.
removing yourself from the constraints of what it meant to have like classical structure, and you were really just using the
Yeah.
instruments to kind of express something in a different way, and that really appealed to me because it felt like it distanced itself so much from I guess the status quo of what music kind of represented at the time, and it was quite a young genre. It
Yeah.
was just a really fun, exciting sort of, you know, style of music to be around at that time.
Yeah, I was gonna like not knowing any of the answer to that question. I was gonna either guess jazz or punk music. Like if I had to guess, because just looking at your art and um, just I don't know, just I that's the feel I get from it is that type of energy. So,
Do you know what? As a combination, that is awesome. Jazz and punk. I'm totally okay with that description. That's rad.
yeah, because it just look at your art is definitely you get that feeling of like you said, like you just said, breaking the rules. I get that feeling of a little bit of non-conformity, right? Energy, which is cool, and that's kind of what I like too. So I guess one of the two, right? It sounds like so. Jazz is definitely
I used to
cool.
like punk as well, to be fair. I haven't really listened to it much anymore. But a couple of my friends were massively into it.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. Yeah. So then you did you go to college, or did you just choose to do something else? Did just after the record label kind of blew up?
I mean, it never got big enough to blow up, I don't think.
Yeah,
But
okay.
it was, you know, it was a good experience to go through when you're sort of 18, right? To try and do something like that, because I think I really learned a lot from it. Um, but no, I did go to college. So I actually studied, so I went to something called an art foundation course. I'm not sure if you have them in America, but it's effectively like a year after you've finished your sort of secondary school studies. Um, and I think its primary purpose is that you kind of are supposed to just work out what the hell it is you want to do, right? Because you've just left school. I think that's pretty much the main thing that it's intended to
Yeah,
represent.
they just have us go and get drunk at parties over here. I don't know.
Oh well, this was like an organized version of that. So you know, sounds like basically the same thing. But no, it was actually a really good year, and it was sort of about that time that I started shifting my like a lot of my focus away from audio into sort of visual programming, and sort of using the computer to create kind of much more expressive sort of visual things. And I don't know if you remember Winamp.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah. What was the
oh, it
um
really whips the llama's ass.
yeah, that yeah, was
Yeah.
that from Winamp? Yeah, that's great.
So there was this visualizer for that called Milk Drop,
Yeah, I
and
don't
I
think I
remember
heard
being
of that one. I
oh,
remember there
so
was a
Milk Drop
lot
was
of
amazing.
plugins for Winamp though, and people would get into, customizing Winamp and stuff like that. I remember that. So yeah, it's bringing back memories for
Yeah,
sure.
I can't remember if Milk Drop came with Winamp or whether you had to install it, but it was just one of the you remember the visualizers on Winamp, right? Some of them are really
Yeah, I
very
do
impressive.
remember them.
But
Yeah.
But Milk Drop was this really cool sort of object graph like programming system. So you could basically take all of these components and kind of slot them together, and then you could write your own functions for certain ways that things would be represented. And it was just this really nice crossover for me, because coming from music, suddenly having this thing that I could then play around with to kind of represent the visuals that went along with the music that I was making. And I could create these plugins it was like a preset for that plugin that would sort of represent that piece of that music. It just became this really interesting kind of way to bridge that gap. And so I ended up doing a lot of, Winamp plugins.
And like, that's interesting though, because, but by that point you were, it sounds like you were like on the art track, like at that point. And
no, very much so.
Interesting. Cause like, you were, I don't know, like, did you choose to do versus going to something more like on the engineering side or the computer science side, you already were thinking of going towards the art side.
Yeah. So
at that point.
The Art Foundation was really good for me to kind of work that out. And I was so one of the things I've always found quite interesting, well, let me describe this a different way. I think I'd spent so long working out kind of how do I represent the computer as this special thing, like, hey, my special thing is that I use the computer to make this, these kind of graphics and this kind of music, and it should sound like that, it should sound like it was made on a computer. And I think during that year of art college began to question that a little bit. And it was sort of around the time of like CG really beginning to take off. I think Toy Story and Pixar had been a thing for a couple of years. And I started really looking into like much more complex rendering systems. So, how did, I think it was 3D Studio Max was like the hot thing back then.
Sounds right.
Yeah, and so I got really interested in that. So during that year, I decided that I wanted to go and do computer animation as a university course. And I think the reason I decided I wanted to do that was because a lot of the stuff that I was seeing could hit this point where you no longer cared whether it was made on a computer. You weren't thinking, wow, it's amazing a computer can do that. You just forgot about the fact that a computer was even involved.
Yeah.
And it just became this wonderful kind of absorbing natural experience, and I think as a contrast,
Toy Story was kind of like that. Like I remember that, like no one really a Toy Story was like, oh, this is made on a computer. Like it just felt like it was really cool, like I just remember when they started doing that, right?
100%. And it's funny because if you go back and watch it, you're like, wow, this is totally made on a computer. But at the time, it was definitely, quite a sort of shift in that regards. And so, I kind of wanted to explore what that looked like. What does it look like to have the computer just be this tool that you're so good at understanding, and you know how to use so effectively and so well, and you understand all the processes to the point where it actually just doesn't matter anymore. It just becomes a way to represent things. And I think it's interesting, right? Because if you look at kind of where we are today, that's so true for so many things that are made using a computer now. You look at any film or television program, every frame is real, right? The rest of it's just CG. And a lot of the time people don't really question that anymore. And I think, it's kind of the sort of post-digital aesthetic kind of thing I was kind of looking towards, I think. So yeah, I found that very interesting. And I actually did do a year of computer animation, but unfortunately they really wanted to double down on just classic animation and ray tracers and do all of this very different stuff than I think they actually wanted to teach in that year. So I actually left that course and decided to do something called computer-based audio systems instead, which was much more, as you described, that intersection between classical software engineering and the sort of principles of audio itself. So that I think fitted much better what I wanted to do. And that was, again, how I then sort of expanded my kind of audio programming stuff and my visual programming stuff kind of alongside that. But it was very much more using the computer as a tool for creation in a way that I felt like the other course wasn't in the same way.
Yeah, it's really cool. And then were you planning on just going in and doing like more animation, like with like in a studio, finding a job in like a studio, that type of thing after you graduated? or you just didn't know at that
So
point still?
it's funny. I kept doing the music software, and that
Yeah.
sort of was ticking along, and that was doing okay. And then I'm just trying to remember. So I guess as a side quest, right? I actually built my first website for contract money when I was, I think, 13.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'd kind of been doing that just to kind of get a bit of extra money.
Yeah.
And at the time that I left university, it was such a big industry at that
Yeah,
point that it
I
was very
imagine
easy.
it's that was probably the late '90s, right? Like the or was it after that?
So early 2000s.
Yeah, so it was after kind of the bust, but still it was probably picking back up with like Web 2 starting up again.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think I kind of followed more of the web track actually after I was at
Yeah.
university, and that kind of led me down the path of doing like really digging into how web browsers worked. And I remember, early CSS transforms, so that we suddenly have like, actual hardware accelerated compositing in browsers and such. And I was doing loads of cool demos with things like that, and making game engines for kind of early Canvas, and just trying to express what awesome stuff you could do with the web, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that was kind of that chapter in my life. And then I sort of moved off into a much more kind of corporate position from that. Again, doing kind of like user interface, a mixture of product and creative interface stuff. And I did that for quite a few years. But it was around the time, I think, that I started getting into the more corporate world that I started taking my artwork more seriously,
Yeah.
but
Your
only
visual
ever as a
artwork.
hobby. My visual art, yeah, sorry, my
Yeah.
visual artwork. But only ever as a hobby. I think after the record label died, I realized, look, I'm probably not going to make a huge amount of money in music. That's okay. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed all of this experience. And so I switched to doing, at the time I was calling it just procedural artwork.
Yeah.
It was, just using the graphics APIs and doing code that would gradually generate something over time that wasn't necessarily prescribed directly. And it wasn't generative in the sense that I was necessarily seeding things randomly. It was just procedural.
Yeah.
And I just kind of kept doing that in the background for years. It was just a way to kind of express myself
Yeah.
in the evenings. And I never expected that to be something that I could turn into a career necessarily. And I think
So it was generative art. It was just, you're saying that it was just that it wasn't seeded with a random, different seed every time. It was kind of like, just, okay, I'm just, working off this one, basically just using code to make one output, really. It's kind of the way it was, right?
exactly, yeah. And sometimes, you change a few variables, you get something slightly different.
Yeah.
But it was generally focused around getting to some, there was no idea of what long form necessarily looks like.
Yeah, like that's
One
that's a
algorithm might.
new thing. Like like that's I think not people don't realize that as much, and they were like, the whole idea of long form is like that's like a new thing.
Yeah,
Like most people were just doing generative art to just make a output, right? And then like if and honestly there wasn't really a market for it until a couple years ago, or at least a big one. Or I mean, how big is it even now? But like it was a lot smaller than it is now for sure. And people were just trying to create one output, and not necessarily create a whole long form series that needs to support hundreds of mints, right?
absolutely. I think the first time I would kind of consider what I was doing was pretty close to kind of what we imagine as sort of contemporary generative art, was probably about 10, 15 years ago, maybe. I was living in Dalston at the time, and I made this algorithm that would take images that were posted on Instagram and convert them into a piece of generative art. And what I wanted to do was show that you could kind of question who was the artist in this regard, right? It's like I can make this program that can sit on a server on AWS, execute whenever someone posts an Instagram picture, and it would just, spit it out the other end. And
That's cool.
I'm not creating it directly. And at the time, it seems crazy, right? It seemed crazy to most people, but I mean, obviously now it seems a lot more normal. And so I had this idea of like, well, how can I demo this? How can I do something interesting with this concept? And so I set up a geofence just for our, or maybe I can't remember if Instagram had feeds back then. This was back when the Instagram API was literally just open, right? You could just query it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's a theme. Like I told the last episode too that, I think I started programming I made an auto liking bot for Instagram. So it seems like,
right.
Like, I don't know, that the early Instagram API made a lot of, I guess generative artists. I don't know, or was generative 100%. Artists were drawn to it for some reason because it was like completely open and very hackable.
I loved that time on the web. Honestly, it was so nice to have these sort of very open, usable APIs and sort of, very open platforms to kind of build stuff on. It was really great. So it's kind of sad that all that stuff's kind of locked away.
Yeah, they just blew up and they had like 9 employees, so they didn't have time to like really lock it down. And then I remember they did start putting request limits on like the API, but then there was basically I could just create like a bunch of access tokens and then iterate over those because I could tell when I was getting cut off on one of them. So then I basically just had, got around that by doing that. So that.
Oh wow, you were determined.
Yes, I was pretty determined. So yeah, it's, I don't know why. Cool. I mean, I got thousands of tens of thousands of followers though, so it was pretty cool like to do that. But, it was like one of those moments where I don't know. I just thought it just showed me what maybe one of the early moments of like the power of programming. I knew it was powerful, but and that's why I learned it and wanted to learn it. But, to have a tangible kind of quote unquote success of like, okay, you built something and you really did something that like no one else could really, unless they did it, do, right? And I'm sure other people were doing it at the same time, but still it's like, wow, this. I just have a bot that's running that's using my account to auto like all these pictures, and then 1% of them are following me back, and it's I'm just opening every time I open the app, I have tons of likes, and it just is kind of wild that I thought of that and was able to just execute it, and it worked, and it really just gave me kind of just continue down the path of okay, I really need to continue to learn programming and just how the web works and art and all that kind of thing like that. So yeah.
No, that's awesome. And it's exactly that feeling that you just described that I wanted to try and communicate through doing this idea. So taking those, it's like, how can you kind of expand that into the real world, right? What that feeling feels like to us, that ability to kind of just recreate this thing and, enable it without our kind of input. So what I said was the algorithm would grab all of the pictures that were posted at my local cafe in Dalston, which is where I was living at the time.
That's cool.
And each one would then generate an image output. And then I went and chose, I think it was my favorite 4 or 5. I think it was 5.
And what was it? Was it doing manipulation on the images, or was it?
So it extracted the color information. It just used the image to extract some geometry. So rough sort of geometric shapes from it. And then it used, if I remember correctly, it was just a noise-based algorithm to kind of grow these landscapes out of the photograph. So they look nothing like the original photo. If you go miles back on my Instagram, you'll be able to find some of them. Not that I use Instagram anymore. My Instagram has been dead for about 5 years.
Yeah.
So
I gotta check those out. That's sounds like an amazing idea. Just even I don't know, it just is awesome.
Well, so So I actually put them in the cafe, right? So I got them printed, my favorite 5 ones, and then put them up in the cafe with the tag underneath them as the name of the person who took the photograph.
Yeah.
So the idea was that someone would come in and go, "Oh, this is crazy. Why is there a picture made by me on the wall? How very strange." And what I hoped was that they would take a picture of it, and that would generate the next image that I could do for the next installation in the gallery.
Wow.
So
Yeah. So it's like, it like starts to, just like corrupt itself really. If you take a, yeah.
right, and so hopefully my goal was to kind of give people a little bit of that experience. And unfortunately, no one came back and took pictures of their picture, which was disappointing. But that's kind of you can see kind of why I feel like that really relates to kind of how we look at generative art now and some of the principles that we sort of apply on chain. I think that was the first time I kind of recognized that I was, that sort of process really made sense for my artwork, trying to express it more as this sort of, slightly out of control system in a sense, than it was just, hey, let me create one piece or 2 pieces or, 3 or 4.
Yeah. I'm definitely going to have to talk to you offline about that algorithm, because that's really cool. Because I'm actually working on, I've been doing a lot of photo stuff, like mixing generative art with photography with my brother at first and Marfa, and then I just released a super rare piece that was a mix of photography and generative art. So it's something that I'm definitely interested in, and I'm continuing to explore. So it's like, and actually what I'm thinking of now is like, I've been toying around with the idea of like, okay, how can I do exactly what you just described, of like extract, information out of photographs, right? And almost create paths, like identify what's the most important part of the composition, right? And what makes that photograph really cool, and have some programmatic way to extract, form data out of that, lines, that composition out of it, so then you can draw textures on top of it, etc. Right? Like that's really cool to me.
There's actually a really good paper. The concept is something called a primitive sketch. It was invented in the 1970s, and I'm just trying to remember who the author is, but it covers this idea of basically taking an image, breaking it into all of its component forms, and identifying what the kind of dominant structures and lines are. I wish I'd read it when I'd made that original piece, but I'll send it to you. It's awesome. It's a really good web.
No, that's definitely that would definitely. I would love to read that, because that's something that I'm really interested in right now. So it's cool.
I love those pieces, by the way. You gave me one in Marfa, and yeah, it's awesome. It's been really nice to see them kind of evolve and change a bit.
Yeah, exactly. Well. I've been like moving on, and I think that was really cool when I did it with Brett, and he was on last week, and we talked about it, and it was really fun. But like in that, like really, I just like kind of in Photoshop identified areas where I wanted the generative textures to come through, and what kind of generative. But it was more just a manual process. I would love to. What I'm exploring now is like, how can I take like you did, like a photograph just off the fly, right? That just, I'm not putting into Photoshop and taking layers out where I want it to be, and like generative, like basically identifying, and I'm sure there's a way to do this now with AI, but I would be more interested in just doing it programmatically, but like, extracting, okay, what makes this photograph really compelling, right? And identifying, the compositions around that are producing that, and then, okay, can I make a version of this photograph with generative textures that, that can still be like, identified as like, okay, that's, maybe the same place or the same, maybe it doesn't look 100% realistic, but it still like maintains the overall composition and I guess the feeling of the photograph, right? But doing that generatively, right? So
it's challenging.
Cool stuff. I'm sure I'm gonna, yeah, it is challenging for sure. I'm already in it, but yeah, it's But the thing is, I think you don't have to make it like, at least the way I'm thinking of it, I don't want it to necessarily, I don't have to make it like a carbon copy of the photograph, right? Like just use the photograph in an interesting way to kind of inform the generative output, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how like literal you want the interpretation to be. I
Exactly.
think,
Yeah.
the interpretation that I was doing in this algorithm was like so illiteral, right? It
Yeah.
just, there was no way that you could say, hey, this was from this particular photograph. I mean, unless you looked at the colors would definitely kind of hint at it.
Yeah.
But to kind of have sort of recognizable form and structure can become, quite the challenge to get the balance right, especially over like a broad sort of range of input types.
Yeah, I mean, I think AI would definitely help with this a lot. Like if I wanted to use AI, because like AI, you can do computer vision, it can recognize a building versus what's not a building. Like it can. I'm sure if you start bringing that in, and it just having it help you to kind of identify the subjects in a picture, and then going off that, that's going to be pretty. It's probably a more accurate approach than like trying to look for, okay, like certain lines, that are overly saturated and form a type of, bounding box or something, you know what I mean? I'm just guessing, but I feel like the AI approach nowadays, like with a lot of things, like with more and more things, the AI approach is like the more optimal, or at least the one that produces the better results.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you can do quite a lot even with simple things though. So, even saying, looking for areas of particular types of contrast and then
Yeah.
using like edge finding algorithms to then cut out stencils and
Yeah.
things like that. I mean, I guess if you want to put it on chain, you're kind of going to be avoiding all of the image classifier stuff because it's just going to be way too big. But
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think, it depends. It depends. It kind of depends what you want to achieve, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for we'll chat after and go
Yeah.
into the technical details. We'll save the audience with before diving into too technical stuff. But we should do another. I should do another podcast that's for a very specific like generative artists, people that are interested in that, because that would be pretty cool to like jump into the really. I think some people would be interested in jumping into the coding layer and things like that, and really getting more technical and doing more real technical content. But yeah. So then you were continuing to do the art kind of in a free time and things like that. Let's just fast forward and like, and then you had a career, you said in like the UX field and things like that. Did you maintain that career, up until kind of recently, or is that where you, or did you jump into like the programming side more, or what's the story with that?
I think the best way to describe it, right, is that the thing I've always loved is just getting to express myself through computers as my medium. Like that's just the thing I've always adored doing. Having that freedom to create something that I want to make, that represents something that it can either be what I like, or things that I think are going to connect with people, or just to express an idea that I have. I did that my whole childhood with music and then graphics, and just having pushed that aside, the thought that I could then turn this into something that actually would be, a sustainable career, it made so much sense to me that I thought, okay, let me pull together a piece that I've been like, so Z-Huge, right? My first release, it was something I'd written in Python like years ago. And I just was like, okay, let me fix this. Oh wait, where do I release Python? Oh, no one does Python. Okay, what am I going to do? So I had to build the whole stack. And I built my own smart contract.
I'm going to share the screen a little bit, and so people know what we're talking about if they're watching the video. If you're listening to the audio and you want to see some of Anthony's work, just make sure you watch the video on YouTube or on X, and you'll see the visuals. But we'll try to talk through and it as well. So, but yeah, so huge is what we're talking about. So I have that up on the screen here.
So that one was self-published, and it was just, dipping my toe in the water to say, okay, look, I have been doing this. I want to see if people are interested in my work. At the time I was working full time on other stuff, and I launched it, and it went really well. And I think it sold out unbelievably fast, so much faster than I could possibly have imagined. And at that point in my head, I was like, this is it. This is the chance. I've been wanting to do this for my whole life, right? And I've never been able to make this into a career. So I suddenly realized, okay, let me try, see if I can do this again. So there's a big write-up there on kind of how it works.
Yeah.
And so then I started working out, okay, well, let me see if there's another piece that I can pull together. And so I started porting everything to JavaScript, so I could do like a release with GM Studio. I think we were talking about building our own studio at the time, if I remember correctly. And that became Mind the Gap.
Yeah.
And so that was quite a few months later. And I said to myself, if I launch this and this goes well, that's it. I'm done. I'm going to leave. This is going to be my life.
Yeah.
And that's amazingly what happened. And so I got to be a full-time artist from that point onwards, which is not something I expected to.
Oh, this
to
is
happen.
A crazy story. You want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. So the that was quite a bit of fun, actually.
To people that are listening, it says, this is on Anthony's site, and it's talking about Mind the Gap, and it's saying it says, my family gifted me a special piece of artwork, and only that you knew the artist very well, and it turned out to be.
They wouldn't tell me who it was.
It was you.
Yeah, I thought that was just a really fun story. So my parents are really good supporters of my artwork. They've got tons of pieces up in their house, like old, new stuff all over the place. And it's really nice. And so they found this piece when they were clearing out the attic. And it was a painting that I'd done when I was, I think, 2
years old.
And they framed it and gave it to me for Christmas, and wouldn't tell me who it was by. And so it felt, it like had this sort of childlike joy to it, which I really loved. And I was curious kind of who'd made it. And then they told me it was me. So it was just a really nice kind of,
it's beautiful. Do you think, I asked like a lot of guests I have on the podcast this, do you think that, do you think it's innate, the creativity and being an artist and wanting to create things, or do you think it's learned? Because I don't know. You don't know.
I think creativity is taken away from people.
That's what I said with DCA, and
right.
We talked about that, and I thought that was a really good conversation. Is that, like, I think, as we get older, right, the creativity, fades away, right? Like, that's something that happens, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, I'm sort of confronted with this every day right now, because we've got a 10-month-old and she's amazing.
Yeah.
But my God, I mean, she is, she's all over the place. It's unfettered creativity, right?
Yes.
The only thing that's reining her in is kind of directing her in the right direction.
It's interesting because it's part of, creativity is like, it's non-conformity in a way. It's not the structures that were put in place that make us, that are important and make us, show up to work on time and to pay the bills and to work in an orderly society and having laws and things like that. Like, all these things are really great and allow us to, live in a community, right? And live in a society, but, they're kind of, they're also, like, creativity is kind of almost the opposite of that, right? It's this play, this, free flow of ideas and creating, right? And I think it's sometimes those are, as we grow, quote unquote, grow, and, learn to live in society and follow these rules and things like that. It's unfortunately like for a lot of people that kind of they stop seeing beyond those kind of boundaries, and their creativity can sometimes feel like it drops, or they wish they had more creativity and things like that. So yeah.
I totally agree. I think the way that school is structured as well is so against the idea of creativity. I mean, for me, creativity is it's not just, you know, the ability to kind of do something different, but it's the ability to kind of assemble ideas from very different
Yeah.
areas in your mind. It's this ability to kind of compose things in a way that is not necessarily direct or obvious, or see patterns in things that, you know, maybe other people don't necessarily recognize, and to
Yeah.
be able to assemble them into a way that makes them make sense. Um, and, you know, at school, you're kind of like, well, hey, look, here's art over here, and here's
Yeah.
science over here, and here's, you know, geography over there. And there's no overlap with any of these subjects necessarily, in the sense that,
Yeah.
you know, hey, cool,
It's
well, what if I want to do physics in art, right? Or how do I
exactly
do?
the specialization really, I think I can't say it's bad, it's not bad. It's just specialization has allowed us to, produce a lot of, things would not be able to be done, like the things that we produce, and, the way that everything's structured, and the output wouldn't be able to be done if we didn't have specialization. However, like we did lose a lot going to specialization as well. Like, I look at like people like Leonardo da Vinci. You read Walter Isaacson's great biography of him, and you just, it was back then. There was nothing like, it wasn't odd that he was an artist and an inventor and an engineer, and was, you know, looking at anatomy, and also, at the same time, like using that anatomy to, kind of form his art. And, that wasn't weird. But today it's like, that would probably be
So that's
looked at
actually,
as strange. Like those are different things, different specializations, right?
so that's actually where the name Mount Vitruvius comes from.
Oh, really?
The
Wow. Yeah, we were talking about. I didn't ask you about that yet, but of what? Oh, the Vitruvian Man. Yeah.
Well, so it's not the Vitruvian Man directly, but so Da Vinci did the Vitruvian Man based on the work of Marco Polo di Vitruvius. So
Okay.
Marco Polo di Vitruvius, he was an architect in around like 50, I think it was 50 BC. And he wrote this book called De Architectura, which is this really ancient sort of ideology on like architects, one of the earliest kind of really well thought through and structured architecture books. And in it, he describes this idea of what makes a great architect. And it
Yeah.
always really stuck with me. So he describes it as someone who understands not just the material science itself, but the social structures that exist within society, a love of
Yeah.
music, a way to think about the science as much as they think about the philosophy.
Yeah.
And it was this combination of elements that he describes as a really good architect. And it just really struck me, because I think for me, that's always been the way that I've thought about most of my applied self, is to see the opportunity that's bigger than just applying it for the sake of applying it. It's why do we care about these things in this particular way? And looking at things from this very holistic point of view when it comes to kind of applying things, especially through computing. It's always bugged me throughout my life that people are a designer, they're a programmer. They
Yeah.
are these specializations that lack all purpose and direction. I've always been that annoying person in every single company and every single team who's like, "Great, you're a designer. Let's go do some code. Let's like, why aren't you learning to
Yeah.
code?
Yeah.
You would understand how to do this so much better, right?" It's like, and
Yeah.
so I've kind of always bridged all of those things, because that's
Yeah.
just what I've always loved. I learned to code because I wanted to make things. I didn't learn to code because I loved code.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah. I don't think many people do.
and
I don't know. I at least the people I've known, they always wanted to make things, but maybe some people just learn code but I don't know how you, I don't know. That's not me either.
Well, yeah, the Vitruvian element. So the Vitruvian Man was based on Marco Polo di Vitruvius' study of anatomy for him to become like a better architect, to understand the human body in a much better way, so that he could create something that felt much better in terms of like architecture and his additional work around that. So that always really kind of connected with me. And so I remembered reading De Architecture when I was thinking, oh, what name should I go under for the work that I'm putting together?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's really good. I didn't know that, so that's great that we stumbled upon the origin of the name for sure.
Yeah, you beat me to it.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's was amazing. Reading that book, I really recommend everybody read that Walter Isaacson biography, because it really is enlightening. I really like Walter Isaacson. I mean, Ben Franklin, his that biography was also really great. But yeah, I just showed that, like, these distinctions. I think that was the clearest part of the book, is just that at least I saw, is like how freely it wasn't abnormal for you to be interested in these kind of fields that we think of, like, okay, now we have like STEM fields and non-STEM fields and these type of thing. And I think it was much more acceptable back then to kind of float through these different fields. And I think it's a huge strength when you're able to do that, because you're able to see things that, people that are just in one, if you're just looking in one field, there can almost be some groupthink. People just view things in one way. They approach a problem in the same way. When you have a broad knowledge of a lot of different, and interest in a lot of different things, you can often be really effective and see things in a way that, quote unquote specialists don't see it because, like, they just haven't thought of it another way, right? Of the problem. You're able to conceptualize problems differently, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that's why a lot of people, like us, gravitate towards being an artist. It's the freedom to do that. It's
Yeah.
your remit as an artist is not defined. It's entirely up to us how we want to define what that looks like for ourselves, and how we then express that.
Yeah.
Like, art as a subject at school is very different from art as a subject in the real world. So it's,
Yeah,
I think,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the one thing I think, yeah, I think one thing, like, I've realized that doing art and being an artist and things like that is, like, you just do it, right? Like, I think in, like you said, like in school and things like that, it's very structured. Like they put, like, everything, like, structure behind it and stuff like that. But, really, like, when you're practicing art, it's really just put stuff out there that you like, just make stuff you like, like, and that's the real success in art, right? Is, are you making things that you really enjoy and that you are proud of, right? You can't control the market. You can't control those things, right? Like, and I don't think, like, most artists would, they wouldn't make things that, at least the artists that I've had on this podcast, I know, and, like, people I know, just just from working with other artists and talking to them, is like, I don't think they would just make things to please the market. It seems like, at least the successful artists, because I don't think they'd probably be good at emulating what the market likes, because, it's just a completely different beast. But I think they just really make things that they really like, and if they, it just happens then to line up with the market or with other success. But and maybe it doesn't, but still, again, like, if you're making things you like and you're making things that you think are cool, you've already won, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting reflection, right? Going from, because I struggled with this originally when I after I did Mind the Gap, and I was saying to myself, look, this is your opportunity. You can do this full time. Switching that switch from, this was just something you did on the side that was something that was enjoyable and fun in your spare time, to this is now your vocation.
That's
actually quite a scary experience. And it makes you reflect on that question a lot, right? What do I make something for the market? Do I make something for myself? Do I make something that I think is going to,
and that's why
be appreciated by these people?
Personally, like I couldn't do that. Like I couldn't, I don't think I ever could do this art full time. I need to have I always need to have, I'm an engineer, software engineer is what I've done since, start of my career, and I think like I would always want to continue doing that. Even when I had really big success in 2021 and things like that, mainly because I just am afraid that the pressures of making money would change how I would approach my art. And that was scary to me. And it still is very scary to me of, having to release things. And I don't say this as any, any judgment or anything like that to artists that are making a living and have to release work on a regular basis and, just put things out there. You know what I mean? Like I completely understand that as well, but I'm just saying in my personal, like, it would be really hard for me to do that. And, I don't know if I could even like produce work. Like, I feel like I'm afraid I'd put out work that I wouldn't be proud of, which is like the most, probably the worst thing in the world to me.
No, I totally hear that. And it's a really hard thing to balance. I think I struggled for a few months after I decided to go kind of full time, because I felt a little bit paralyzed by that question. That idea of like, okay, well, this has to work now. Until I think the thing that kind of helped me set my mind sort of reasonably straight on that was, where do I want to be as an artist, rather than the question of what do I want to create. And then think about, to me especially, it helps to say, what do I want to be able to do as the next big thing? And it's not selling loads of work, right? It's, I want to have a gallery show, or I want to have a release with these group of people, right? And that, you can, because those individuals are people who appreciate and understand art, you're not changing your nature. You're trying to express what it is that you want to do. You can, to me, it felt much more natural to set that as a goal. And I think, like, when I create a piece, I mean, what I'm doing right now is a good example, right? I'm pretty clear in my head of what the next piece that I'm releasing, like the essence of what that is. There's experiments and ideas. I've been doing a lot of studies into like, how do I get lighting right? How do I get structure right? How do I get all of these things that I want to kind of come together and feel right, as little studies where I'll just try an idea and sort of see if it works. And I share some of those, right? And I see like, okay, well, other people seeing this in the same way as me. And it's not that I'm defining my opinion by seeing what people think of that, but it's nice to know, like, hey, these other people, and oh, look, this person who I really respect, oh, Raven liked this particular piece, right? That's a good indicator that, okay, someone else is seeing this in the same way that I am. And it can just be a nice little bit of additional confidence to kind of help you move on with that thing. But it's important not to let that dilute your intent. Absolutely. And not to just chase that thing, because that's not going to get you necessarily anywhere, especially if you're focusing on the kind of opinions of this unknown mass. It's not
really
helpful.
in Harvey, who I've had on episode 1, he is very similar. Like I've talked to him before of him, he shares a lot of stuff to Twitter, and, probably Farcaster now. And he really like takes the like counts and kind of the analytics around that. And, that informs kind of the direction he's going to go with, is he's seeing, what hits and what doesn't. Right. And he really uses that information to kind of shape his the where he's going to proceed with the work, right? And like you said, I think it's still a he's not letting it completely direct the work, but he is using it as feedback, right, for that work. Yeah.
Well, I think like that is totally one way to do it, and I think Harvey's an incredible artist. I love Harvey. He's one of my favorite human beings. He's brilliant, and if that's if that's what works for him, that's amazing. Right? And I think he does some absolutely incredible art, which is unlike anything else that exists out there.
Yeah.
I think another way to look at that is to just get feedback from a smaller group of people that you really trust. I got this feedback like a while ago from a bunch of artists that I really trust. And that smaller, tighter knit group of people giving you very honest and sometimes brutal feedback is actually really, really helpful. Because you're not focusing on kind of the broader appeal, and you're able to then reflect your idea with them in a way that they're going to take that time to kind of take it on board and appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think the other thing about sort of social platforms is that it's so fast paced a lot of the time that someone scrolling by is maybe not in the right headspace to appreciate that thing that you're putting out there.
Yeah.
The subtlety of it, why it might be interesting, why it might be special. And I think a lot of very sort of in your face stuff tends to float to the top just because it's attention grabbing when you see it in the feed. And sometimes that's not the thing that you want to make. And so finding that space that can fit, and so it can feel like, and a lot of my work is quite like loud, and some of it will be very loud and expressive. And, it's great to see it do well when it does go to that sort of side of things. But I think having that more sort of personal, intimate feedback for something, especially a bit more personal. I'm working on something that's a little bit more, I guess, intimate as a piece now. And so having that sort of close feedback has been really helpful for that.
Yeah, that's something I definitely I personally struggle with, is the feedback aspect of it, when to ask for. I mean, I just haven't worked into my process well. I think I do ask for feedback, and sometimes I do get it helpful, but sometimes I'm just like, I don't care. I'm just releasing what I want to release. I don't know. It just maybe that's where I need to learn as an artist and grow. But I don't know. I also think other part of me says no, there's a different path here. And I don't think that Jackson Pollock was asking for feedback when he was throwing paint on these canvases, right? I don't think he was saying, hey, wait a second, let's go, let me go bring someone in here and see what I should do next. I don't know. There's just, I feel like they're, I don't know. I guess my fear of feedback is that, because I'm very personally inspired by that type of art, right? The abstract expressionism, and this kind of okay, the art is about a flow of emotion, almost subconsciously, that layer, and putting that into the art. It's bringing it to the conscious level of having feedback and discussing it. I'm afraid that will then overly, I guess, conceptualize the work, overly, you're bringing it to a layer of language at that point, right? You're overly, I don't know. That's at least my fear on some of my work, of when I am building it, is I want it to be really, at least what I think of is more okay, what am I what do I want to make on that sublime level, right? And that is below the language level, and creating art through that realm, that kind of raw emotion, or whatever you want to call it, level. And when you start to bring it to a level that is, through language and things like that, sometimes then you're not creating that type of art, or I don't know. At least that's what my gut is telling me. Maybe you use the feedback in that case. Maybe you try to use that feedback and you try to, take that in, and then, as you're seeing that feedback, then it almost seeps into the unconscious, right? Of doing that. But yeah, of how you start to see things, right?
Yeah. No, I get it. I think there's, you can kind of receive feedback either on the concept or the aesthetic, right?
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the time in the art world, people try to represent the concept more thoroughly than actually, especially early on. It sounds like what you're trying to say is that you just want to kind of get this aesthetic element right and know what that
Yeah.
feeling is for you. And that's much harder to kind of give feedback on
Yeah,
from
because
the
sometimes
perspective.
like with my pieces, like I'll say I really like this output or something like that, and you could ask me why do you like it, and I have no idea. I'm just like I don't know. Like I like it, like I just do. Like sometimes I'll put things in, they won't be centered, right? They don't. I actually will get upset if they. I won't like it if they are completely like conform to basically a um if they're exactly centered or something like that, like because it feels to me like okay, everyone's done that, you know what I mean, or that's I don't know, that's at least what the way I think about it sometimes, but maybe that's a different way of like, I guess I'm just attracted to um this, maybe it's nonconformity, or it's just like playing with the rules, right? Like that we have out there that are agreed upon, right? Like that's what makes art and music, and in music we have a scales, and that is a socially kind of agreed upon, where music is gonna use these notes, right, that are gonna make up the scale, and then we're gonna have the Western scale, and everybody's gonna make music in that scale, and then because of that, everyone's using that. Then from that, people you know basically get onto that pattern, and they think, and they're like, oh, it makes sense, it's comfortable, right? It's feels at home, right? Because you're following the
Yeah.
rules, right? But there's something that's
No,
alluring to me of not following the rules, I guess, or bending the rules.
no, I hear that. I definitely hear that. I think I'll pick on something that you said because I think it's really important to me, especially. Which was not pick on. That's not the right way to describe it. Not picking on you. The I'll pick up one of the things that you said, which was the idea of kind of like not being able to verbalize why you like something.
Yeah,
Like I actually think that's an extremely important part of developing a piece. Like
yeah,
being able to label why something is meaningful to you, and it's something that I do spend a lot of time on. So
that's super
I kind of
interesting.
think
Yeah,
about the process of developing a piece is a little bit like carving. You start with this sort of larger, fluffier sort of vector, right? Direction, this thing that you think you want to kind of achieve. And over time, you take all this time to kind of carve away at that, like gradually take little bits off it until it's this sharp, like really concise little object that you can say, this is exactly what this is.
that's really
And I think,
cool.
well, but I think like the process of knowing why you like something is so important in that. Like
Yeah,
you have to know, okay, this is speaking to me because of these reasons, and that relates to the idea that I have because of this. And if you can kind of associate those things together, you've just carved a little bit off that big fluffy ball, right? And it becomes this much more,
you're
it's
like
that
reverse
process of
engineering
refining.
you're reverse engineering your I guess that unconscious, right? Like you're trying to extract, versus just saying, oh, it's the unconscious, kind of like what I've been doing, and you can't explain it. You're saying, no, I'm trying to go fishing, and I'm going to try to get a hook in that and bring it up and figure out, okay, what exactly is behind that, of why I actually like it. Like if I don't know why I like it, then I need to find out why I like it, so then I can systematize it.
Absolutely. But it's not just from the aesthetic level either. Like even conceptually, if you think there's something that's important to you about the piece from a concept perspective, it's boiling that into why it is meaningful to you as well.
Yeah.
And then trying to kind of extract and again refine it down to this like concise little thing. And I used to be terrible at that, right? I had to get better at that process over time.
Yeah.
Um, and it's still something I struggle with, right? But the trigger for me is sitting in that state of not knowing why, right? And if I'm in that state, I know I need to get better at what it is that I'm trying to think about.
Yeah. That's really cool. That's really awesome. Yeah. Cause I think it's also like, it's also back to the goal of the art, right? As well. Like, you have to, like, it's like I always bring this up, but like, like Fidenza is a great project and things like that. I really like Fidenza. I like Incomplete Control more than Fidenza. If you've seen those, I think I've said that before. And like,
Oh, I have one right there.
You have an Incomplete Control?
Not a real one. Well, it's an official
a print?
I got it through Graylers. Yeah, it's going on the wall when we finished
awesome.
the living room.
That's great. But
Yeah,
I like, like I talk about that because like at first I was like, I actually didn't like Incomplete Control. Like I was very taken aback by it. But over time, the more I sit with it and view that series, the more I actually like it. Like, and I think that's what Tyler was going for with it, is that I think Fidenza was really pop, and like, it fit in with a lot of the expected aesthetics that you may have thought of as like, oh, this is really like a pop art, almost piece like that follows all the rules, like I was talking about earlier. And I think Incomplete Control is just like, it's a statement on what if we don't follow the aesthetic rules, right? And we do something different. And I think that's a powerful,
very brave piece of work.
A powerful statement, which I don't know. I think it's, yeah, I think what it comes around, what it was circling around though, is that it's some of this stuff is just like, you have to define your goals in art, right? Too. Like, what do you go, do you, like you said before, like, do you want to get in a gallery? Do you want to, all these are really important questions to ask yourself of like where you want to go. And then you honestly, like, the way your process is gonna have to be different, depending on if you want to meet certain goals, right? And feedback is critically important. If you want to be a successful artist in the sense of a commercially successful artist, you need to listen to feedback, because you need to get, you need to understand, what people in that are collecting and things like that, understand that, yeah, it needs to come from yourself 100%, but you also need to be channeling that through, what the expectation and those rules of what quality generative art is, or art in general, right? So
that's very true.
I think but if you if you don't care about the market at all, and you just want to make stuff that you're not even going to show anybody, then I guess success looks completely different, right, at that point. And so there is, I guess, another discussion on that of like, it all revolves around the goal of why you're making art, right? And where you're going with it, and what you're trying to accomplish with it, right? Or if you're not trying to accomplish anything at all, like,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons I'm quite excited to have a gallery show as kind of my next release is exactly for that. It's to show the pieces in a very different way, like Trichromatic, for example.
Yeah,
I don't think you can see, but I have.
We can get it up on the screen.
60 different prints down here, all of different like trichromatic test outputs. Right? And this was the process of refining like all of the different papers and making sure that the mapping of all.
This was such I want to talk about. Let's jump in after we had the meta conversation. Let's jump into your art blogs first, because like, just awesome. Like, I remember, we're both in the Gen Art Club, and I remember you sharing Render's game for the first time in our Work in Progress channel, and I was immediately like, this is awesome. Like, I mean, like, is a lot of quality work, and we have a Gen Art Club. Is a lot of generative artists, and we have we have like a private Slack that Aaron Penne kind of in a couple other. I mean, Aaron Penne invited me. I don't know who invited, but there's a number of Jess Hewitt and another couple different mods that have set it up over time, and like it's an awesome community, and there's also always great work being posted and like work in progress. And Render's game, when you posted it, really stuck out to me. It's like, wow, this is awesome. Like, and to be honest, like I was like, I knew you were submitting it to Art Blocks. I was like, oh, this is gonna be 100% a curated like release. And I was shocked when it wasn't, to be honest. But it's still like a great, one of my favorite projects. Like, I don't know. It's just, maybe it is that, I just love the, it does have that kind of what I love, like that Jackson Pollock kind of look to it, of the curves and kind of just going in random directions and like, just creating these kind of crazy forms, and just the colors of them also feel that way. It's just, they just have tons of energy, and I don't know. I just love it. But maybe it's, I've gloated enough about it. Tell us like a little bit about this project, and like maybe you could just like, how did it come about?
Oh, I'm gonna have to remember now. It was. Thank you, by the way, for saying that. I think I was really pleased with how the piece went down, because I really loved the work as well, and it I think my favorite thing was seeing the chat in Block Talk when the piece got released, and everyone saying like, "Oh, it should have been curated. Why wasn't it curated?" And then a bunch of people going, "Oh, it was Block Talk curated. It's all good." And I was like, "Do you know what? That is better than it being curated." Like, if everyone in Block Talk is going to get behind that as a thing, like that is just, as an artist, you can't ask for more than that. That
Exactly.
was amazing.
I mean, it's just like, sometimes it's just, this was one of them that I was like, I'm sure it was a contentious vote either way if we had it inside, but if I have my short list of, okay, this is something, that I felt should have been curated, this would be on it, for sure. I think it probably, they thought that, the probably maybe about the, just the diversity of the algorithm maybe, but I think that the diversity in long form is actually overrated. It's actually not. Most people collect one output and they put it on their wall. They're not collecting multiple outputs and putting them next to each other. That's just not how most collectors are looking at it. So I personally think like, I'm more willing to overlook the diversity if the individual outputs look great themselves. But I know that the curation board, at least on Art Block side, at least on the long form, they do really look at the diversity of the algorithm and put a good emphasis
They do. I mean, they gave excellent feedback, honestly, on the piece. The point of rejection, and I think the irony was that they didn't. I don't think they expected me to then spend the next like 4 months completely like improving it. So it was very different, when I actually submitted it for curation. And so I don't know. I mean, it ended up where it did, and I'm very happy that the people really enjoyed the piece. I think, in my mind, that's kind of what mattered. But the algorithm itself was originally inspired by the work of, do you know the artist Lee Bay? He's a Peritine artist.
I don't think so.
He makes these giant charcoal sculptures. So he works. Oh, my camera's gone funny. There we go. He makes these giant sort of charcoal sculptures, almost like, imagine a painting on the wall that's actually skimmed charcoal. So they look otherworldly. It looks like the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? As if someone's just taken this like perfect rectangle of charcoal out of the earth and just put it up on the wall, but done in a way where it's sort of crystallized, and you've got these beautiful sort of crystalline structures sort of running through it. And as you move around the piece, you get this incredible sensation of like reflection and depth and structure. They're just magic pieces of work. And I remember I was on a trip in Paris where I was just absolutely transfixed by one of these giant pieces. And so I thought in my head, okay, well, what does an algorithm for that look like? This idea of kind of fragmenting charcoal. What would a sort of like really illustrative version of that look like? How do I illustrate that experience? And my work tends to kind of focus around sort of digital illustration. At that time, it was sort of moving towards this much more, yeah, I guess illustrative feel, and not in a truly digital way, but more in a kind of like materially kind of way as well. And so, yeah, I started working on that idea just in my head of what does this kind of fragmented charcoal sort of structure look like. And there was something about the way that the curves kind of moved within the piece that made me think of different algorithms I could use to kind of structure those curves. Um, so I did a bunch of digging, and I ended up at Hobby Curves, which is a particular. I think it was invented by a German chap. Gosh, probably 30 years ago or something. And they're just this really lovely way to take cubic Bezier curves and kind of combine them together so you get this like inertial smoothing. So you end
Yeah.
up creating these wonderfully smooth, sweeping, beautiful curves that kind of exist as you kind of place down all of the different points within them. And it just felt like such a crazy contrast to this sort of crystalline idea that I had in my head, that when I kind of combined those two elements together, it worked in a way that actually I was like, oh, there's actually something really interesting here. And I went through a bunch of different sort of variations, again, still focusing on this idea of these kind of, you know, like fractured crystalline almost structures, but with this kind of expressive sort of lilting curvature to them. And it was really nice to hear you sort of describe them as almost like Pollock-like in the way that those lines operate, because that's very much the mentality that I had in my head as well, that sort of expressive flow of something as
Yeah.
it moves across the piece. Yeah, so that was kind of the genius of it. And then, you know, focusing in on sort of the very the detail of the kind of graphical style was the other half of that piece kind of coming together. Like I've done graphic
It's a
design
great
for
output. I
years.
love this one. That's a good one.
That's a beautiful one. That's a really beautiful one. I did graphic design for quite a long time, so thinking about, you know, line and depth and shadow and color and, you know,
I love that
balancing
you
all of those
added
elements
and
together.
you did this with Triptomatic too. The you know, basically I noticed that you did this with this project as well, is you kind of did this, you know, on some of them, um, this kind of, oh, I lost it. Where was it?
The
Anyways,
ghostly
the
sort of
ghosty,
outlines.
yeah, like basically, you know, this one has it where you have that kind of, you know, sketch almost in the background, and then it's almost like the, you know, what is it, Sin City, the comic book, where it's, you know, like hand drawn, but then it starts getting like animated and it's colored. It's kind of like that that's that feel from it, right? That it's coming alive from the background, and you have those
Yeah,
kind of
100%. Well, I think
yeah.
it's so it's so easy to do something digitally perfect on a computer.
Yeah.
You know, if you look back at you know, the suprematists. So if you look even at you know, more modern artists like Bridget Riley, you
Yeah.
know, they were trying to do the opposite, right? They were trying to take these very physical materials and make them feel almost digital, almost characterless, like remove the texture, remove the detail, make you just focus on the geometry. And because that was really hard to do back then. And like actually getting those materials right and getting that process right was really difficult. So they wanted to kind of distance their work a little bit from that. And if you remember back to what I was talking about in terms of me wanting to get to the point where actually like my work being on a computer isn't what defines it. It's not. I don't want people to look at it and go, "Hey, this is computer art."
Yeah.
Getting some of those imperfections back in again is a really important way to kind of give you that sense of place and materiality, and something that kind of distances you from just this pure perfection of it being done on a computer. Because,
Yeah.
you know, I added those, right? They are not something that was there that got rubbed
Yeah.
out. Like I literally made them look like that. So, and it's an intentional
Yeah.
decision. And it is to give that sense of place, right? It's to give that sense of craft. It's to give that sense of the
Well,
flow and
you
the
definitely have
description
some
of the
good
rainbow is
texture
fantastic.
here that, like, you can see the noise you added in here really goes to that, right? Of you know, gets that feeling, or even just, how, you got this where the shading is, right? And things like that are really go towards that feeling of that this is, you know, it feels physical, right? It feels like it's on an actual paper, and not
Yeah,
necessarily just a digital piece, right? Makes
so
it feel
people on the
more
podcast
human.
people on the podcast aren't going to be able to see this, but this is one
Yeah.
of the test prints from quite early on in renders. I guess this was closer to the end actually, and what I wanted for this piece was when you print. This was one of the first pieces I designed completely in order for it to be as good on print as it was on
Yeah.
screen. So to get that kind of sense of materiality, even when you've got this kind of very high detail physical print in front of you, was a really strong consideration. And it still looks graphic-y, but actually the colors you get in the print actually feel much better, I think, than they do on screen. I did actually try to fix that for Trichromatic.
Do you?
But I was,
Did you on that point? Did you? Because I've done a lot of printing and stuff like that. Like, and for a piece of me, I did. I offered the free prints with that. Do you have any, like, because basically, there a lot of times if you really want to think about printing, the problem with printing is that the colors that can be printed are actually, like, a lot of times a lot less than what can be especially on modern, newer screens of what the color space is, right? So did you constrain the color space to work well with printing, or did you not think about that?
it's the other way around. So in print, you can express a hell of a lot more colors.
Oh yeah,
Generally
that's
than you
right.
can
It's
on
true.
screen.
Yeah. On the
Yeah.
web, at least. Although,
Well, so,
they're starting to, like, make these crazy screens now that's, like, have bigger color space, but they won't have the printing. You're right. It's the other way around. Exactly.
so there's ways to fix it. So Trichromatic actually goes a step further than Renders Game does. So Trichromatic will actually embed the actual color profile, the high gamut color profile, and the mapping to sRGB profile in the image, even if you download it from a render.
No
So
way.
you can literally take that to a printer, and the profile is pre-embedded. So when they print it, it will map correctly onto whatever paper they want to print on. So it uses the full range of the P3 gamut, and you don't necessarily notice it. But actually, when you look at some of the details, you get this very, like, high gamut pop, and it's what gives the noise so much presence in that piece. It's why it feels very quite alive, because you've got these colors that sort of start moving outside of the regular range.
That's the other trick about using noise. It's tricky, is that, like, you're trying to simulate paper, and then you're printing it on paper, and you can kind of miss sometimes doing that because, like, it's hard to do because then you're printing, like, artificial paper noise on top of paper that already has noise, and it can potentially miss with that. But
you have to be thoughtful with how you do that. I mean, Trichromatic, I did test prints 6 months before that piece was done. It was about developing it to be perfect for screen and print. So if you have if you open a Trichromatic on your iPhone on the live renderer and you compare it to the print, the colors will be pretty much exactly spot on.
That's awesome.
There's a slight more gamma, I think, on the reds, just because it really works so nicely in the print. But they're almost identical, because as long as you've got a reasonably modern iPhone,
you were able to. So you actually do you have a different, like, profile almost? You were able to figure that out of, like, printing. You're actually able to put in the profile that you want the reds more saturated on the print than on display. I didn't even know that was possible. Is that right?
So you can do whatever you want in, like, profiles. It's just a
and that's built into you can build that into a JPEG or like a
So
a
this is only for the
PNG?
ones that you download off my site. So the one that's built
Okay,
into the
okay,
JPEG
okay.
doesn't have the remap, but it is accurate. So
Okay, so
it's
what
literally
you
just the
downloaded
tiniest
off your
text.
site, what do people get? Do they get a PNG or do they get do they get an actual profile or what?
So it's embedded in the PNG, the profile.
Oh wow. And then
Yeah.
so then if I load it into Photoshop and then go to print, Photoshop knows that profile is there and then we'll use that. That's so
Exactly.
cool. That's so cool. Cause like I
Exactly.
just have downloaded, like I use like Hanamule paper or something like that. And like I've just downloaded their profile that they have for, that particular paper, for my printer and, go into Photoshop and like use that.
So that's actually the really important bit. So you do need to use that. But what the profile does is it defines what the remap looks like
Yeah.
to Photoshop. So it's saying, hey, this is what it's supposed to be, how it should be represented on the color triangle.
Yeah.
Then when you apply the Hahnemuller profile, it's going to take what's already there and it's going to remap it to what Hahnemuller have defined within that. So you should always
Yes.
use the printer profile for that particular paper.
Yes. So
Does that make sense?
yeah, no, it 100 makes sense because actually, like more recently, like I was actually messing around with, in there you have to select the rendering intent, right? Like on printing of if you do have colors that are not that are basically that you can't print, at least from this is my understanding of it, is like outside of that triangle that you're just talking about, then okay, like how do we remap them, right? Do we map them, do we just bring them in to the closest, which is the actual default, which actually I have found, and I use that for a long time, but I actually find that that's not the best because if you do have a color, it's going to bring only that one, it's going to make only that color less saturated, and it's going to leave the other ones where they are, which is, I think a big part of color is relationships, right? Of how far away is this color from another one. So the second option is, perceptual, which does basically will bring them all down so they all kind of fit, and but do it at the same, even if a color is, it can print that color, it will bring them all down to a saturation that basically like still maintains those color relationships, which I think is like pretty cool. Like, I don't know, like to me, like that feels more of what at least I would rather have that happen than only bring down one color,
I think I kind of think about it maybe a little bit differently. Like my goal is to set that constraint. Oh, sorry, someone's at my door. I'm not going to get it.
All good.
My goal is to set that constraint to myself of saying, well, this is a piece for web and print. And so getting that mapping as close as possible is the intent that I have. Like I want, and that to me just means working in as high a possible color gamut on the device as I can.
Yes.
So, my stuff will render in, an sRGB display and it'll remap down from P3, which would be the biggest color gamut available on the web, down to, the standard size color gamut, and you probably wouldn't even notice.
Supported? Like when did that start getting supported in like Chrome and web
Just,
browsers?
it was about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, it wasn't that
So
long
it's been
ago,
around in
right?
Chrome for a long time, and it's been around in Firefox for a long time. Actually, no, I think Firefox might be the only people who haven't implemented it for WebGL yet, but it launched in Safari about a year and a bit ago. And that was kind of the last, card to fall that meant, okay, cool. Well, I can expect this to work on everyone's Apple devices now. It's okay to go ahead and use this stuff.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, no, it makes a big difference. I can tell with your work that you're using it because like on my screen, the saturation is like a lot more than I usually see on the web for sure. Like, which is awesome.
It makes a huge difference. I mean, you can get kind of eye melting level of gamut and saturation.
Yeah, I wonder if it's because I have an Apple Studio display. I'm sure that supports it. But
100%.
I have another display here. I'm not sure if it does. I should test it on that, but and see the difference. But yeah, have you found that like what percentage of displays now like support the larger color space? Like is it most of them coming out now?
As I did look at some stats a while ago. I can't remember, to be honest, but it was enough that it's just sensible to use
TVs
as
too,
kind of
like the new TVs support. P3
Yeah, so
or
if
yeah.
it supports HDR, you're kind of
Yeah.
probably most of the way there. You might get like 90%, I
Yeah.
think, of P3. I can't remember where HDR fits. I think it's a little bit smaller than
Yeah.
P3 in terms of its like extension in the gamut. Um, or it depends which version of HDR. There's a bunch of different versions of HDR, but that also depends a little bit on how you're communicating with it. If it's a TV plugged into a computer, how those
Yeah.
two things communicate effectively, and whether that actually supports HDR as a transport. But the nice thing about doing it on the web is you get an automatic fallback from P3 if you use it. So Chrome will automatically convert back to sRGB and display it as best it can based on your monitor's profile, from what I understand. So you can kind of use those technologies without having to worry too much about it, if that makes sense.
Yes. No, it makes a lot of sense. This like both these projects are so good. Like it's just, I love that with this project, you really, you just, I love the way you play with the colors are one thing. You just like nail color palettes, like you bring, which the colors just bring so much energy, which is something that do you spend a lot of time thinking about color palettes, or do you set predefined color palettes, or you more go off relationships between the colors and around the color wheel? Like how do you think about color when you're coming up with
So
a
so Render's
project?
Render's game was well. So I'll tell you a bit of a story. I sucked at colors until about 4 years ago. I was so bad at color. I had no idea how to apply it. It was something that I always really just yeah. Every time I would get to color, I wouldn't know how to approach it, and so I kind of spent a couple of years just really digging into color, and a lot of it's just honestly building your own taste and understanding what do I like about
Yeah.
relationships between things, what colors really speak to me, why do I like these harmonies, and get a good monitor. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Appreciating color, you won't be able to unless you have, in my opinion anyway, it was what made a big difference for me, was getting a really good quality display. Um,
Like
and
this
really just
piece, like
experimenting with
this
it, finding.
green, people that are watching the video, but even if you're not, like I can totally tell that like I think very few people are really taking advantage of the larger color space, but like these greens right here, like look amazing. Like, like in this green right here, like it really makes a huge difference. Like I can totally tell that those would not be that saturated if, you didn't do what you did. And like, I'm not viewing it on this screen. Right. Like
So
it
the
makes a huge
greens are
difference.
really limited. Yeah, greens are really limited in sRGB. You really notice it in the greens, definitely. The yeah, the way actually I applied color in trichromatics is quite interesting. So there's a bunch of predefined palettes, and so 50% of the outputs are from those predefined palettes.
Yeah.
But then there's the other 50% of the collection is completely generative palettes. And what it does is it takes every color that exists within the algorithm. Um, it builds a new palette based on a theme, and then tries to sort of shift each of those colors to make sure that they're going to fit really well together using a bunch of different processes to kind of manipulate the color slightly,
Yeah.
um, to find sort of slightly better harmonies. Um, but it takes one of like the original palettes
And when you say
and all
theme,
of the
just you
gamuts
mean
and pieces into play.
like what do you mean by theme? Like complementary? Is that kind of like, that type of color relationship around the color wheel, that type of thing?
So
Like
pop open the metadata on that one, and you'll see what I mean. I think
I think I have to go to this
that will
page.
probably help you understand it a little bit better. Because I'm just
Oh, right
trying to
here.
remember.
Displacement imperfect. So palette range full.
Yeah, so
Gen
generative
palette
palette
bias
bias.
assertive.
Yeah, so they're more emotionally driven than they are necessarily thematic or about color science. And
Cool.
so the bias, if I remember it correctly, the way that the bias operates is it says, let me try and find a combination of things that occupy this sort of space. So every color has a category, if I remember correctly, and it will then try to use a subset of that to build a palette and then manipulate any colors that it tries to choose that don't necessarily fit. And it actually, I think, if I remember correctly, it can go through about sort of 60 colors until it finds the right combination based on
Wow.
the seed value. So it does. One of the processes I use a lot in my algorithms is kind of checkpointing. So I basically say, run this generative process, and then test that thing that you ended up with fits a set of criteria. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't, either exclude part of it and run it just for those pieces again, or exclude the whole thing and just run it again until you find a combination that works better. And so what I tend to find sometimes in my algorithmic work is I can't work out a process that fits exactly what I want it to do, but I know when it's right. So I can write what that check looks like and says, hey, this combination looks correct. These are the balances that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And actually just keep trying again and again and again until you get to that point where you've found that balance. And obviously each time it does it, it's deterministic. So every seed always ends up at the same kind of outcome.
Yeah. It's
But it's
really,
just a nice way to build complex systems without really having a hugely complicated set of
and what do you
inputs.
think about proportions? Is that, do you do that as well? Like color proportions? Because like, that's an important thing that I kind of discovered is like, like at first I started doing like, okay, I got the colors right, but I'm doing like the same, like random amount of the same of the colors. Right. And like, you realize, oh, that's not like,
So
you end up that you have to like, almost like you said, a theme, like you have to, um, proportion the colors to make it that, okay, these colors or this color is going to be dominant and really stick out, and these other ones are going to be the supporting cast, right?
yeah, and there's also thresholds of the amount that it can bend colors, so it doesn't skew them too far in terms of hue, saturation. Was I using HSL or was it okay? It's probably HSL. So it doesn't skew them too far away from their
Yeah.
original tonality. And then it will actually do that same transform. It will try and balance those transforms with other colors as well, so that you end up with the hue shift kind of working in the same way for the other colors, as long as they fit certain constraints. The algorithmic color process was quite involved for
I
trichromatic
bet.
quite a lot of work to get that to feel right. But it was great because I was so happy to be able to do 50% of them as completely algorithmic
Yeah, and even
palettes.
like, you got these, it seems like these yellows and the blues are kind of like, there's some relationship there. Like, is that just by chance in this one, or does it kind of pair different
It's
colors together?
Yeah, so it does some pairing based on the categorization, but the colors are not always the same, so it can kind of shift them around a little bit to help them blend a little bit more seamlessly.
Yeah.
Um, it uses like, if I remember correctly, it'll take like the hue rotation from an existing palette and try to match that rotation, but in any angle across another palette as well. So it can do a bunch of ways to kind of apply similar aesthetics, either from categorization,
Yeah, this is
like rotation types. There's a whole different set of ways that it can combine them, and then those go through a checkpoint check to say, does this look right? Does this fit enough balance that we want to see across our wheel based on how many different color points that I wanted to have within the output color set? And it will reject it and try again if it doesn't match it. So it's a lot of it's like a balance between me having created enough for it to start with, and then just enough for it to kind of play with in terms of the algorithm that can make something that looks and feels very different, but not too much freedom that it can kind of break out of those constraints and do stuff that really starts to clash. Like everything should feel very harmonious and feel like a handmade palette was what I was aiming for. And some of them are really crazy. Like, and they don't, I would never probably have put those colors together
yeah.
necessarily myself, but they all feel harmonious, which is what I was looking for with the way that the algorithm would create the result.
Yeah, I did something similar. I just like, my first project Moments was all pre-made palettes, but then Piece of Me I think it was 50-50, or maybe it was 25. I forget the exact odds, but then I used color science to like generate some of the palettes. But yeah, it's cool to do that. And I think you did it amazingly in this project. Like, the fact that this is a generated palette is like, it's like amazing. And just like these little details, like that is like, you really spent a lot of time on this, I can tell, because even coming down into like this detail right here of like this, just not imperfect line, right? That just makes it, again, like it just makes it feel human, right? And that's the kind of goal of it, is that you know, it doesn't make it, like you said in the beginning, it doesn't feel like a machine would do that imperfect thing right there, right? Or even the shading,
Yeah,
right? Like this feels like it's faded, you know, like there's some sort of like stain here maybe or something like that, right? On the
but
paper.
it's totally. It's based on like what overprinting looks like when you have too much ink. So it's supposed to kind of give you that sensation of like having either rollered it or maybe it's been printed in error. You know, it's like it's not trying to be explicit about what that thing is, but it
Yeah.
takes sort of cues from a lot of those kind of imperfections that you see in print work.
Well, it's like that's the thing about, and I think I've talked about this with other people that have been on the podcast as well. Is like, you know, to be a really good artist is, you know, really about observation is one of the biggest things you can develop, right? You know, we talked about, you know, if you want to be a good chef, you should definitely eat a lot of food, taste food, figure out how to, you know, identify what is in a dish, you know, just by tasting it. But like, you know, here you could see that like in generative art, if you want to be a good generative artist, you really have to think of like you said before, like on a conceptual basis, but like you really in this, you're really breaking down, you know, you're looking at something and really breaking it down to and observing clearly, okay, what is making up this, right? Like in breaking it down to like so you can emulate it, right? And to feel genuine. In details that most people would just, you know, you just look at it, you don't think about it to like you don't, like you said, again, like you're bringing things that are maybe unconscious or you're not thinking about them, or you wouldn't think about them in figuring out exactly how that works, right? Um,
It was especially important for trichromatic because one of the things I wanted the piece to do was operate at a variety of different scales. So when the piece is very sort of you know, zoomed out, the structures are very small. You can pack a lot of detail in there. You know, there's a lot of different forms and shapes and sort of lilting structures that exist, and that can become the focus. And I think those pieces are great; they're fantastic. But I also wanted it to work at this really large scale, where you just have these kind of very large structures and objects that again evoke that sense of kind of lilting, like uncertain geometry, but also to still feel interesting at that scale. Like you suddenly need a whole extra layer of what that visual detail and intrigue can look like. And so that's kind of often one of the hardest bits I find in generative art is to get the scale to work in a way that it feels just as impactful when it's really in your face and super close up, or super distant and like really complicated and
yes.
extremely detailed. And so getting that balance of detail across a work is really hard. And so that's where a lot of these kind of small fine details start to really sing, is when you've got these much larger structures and you become much more aware of them in those particular outputs and in those
Yeah.
particular
It's
pieces.
also like hard because, you know, it's just like, you know, I think you don't have as much control over how people are going to view these, right? Digital art in general is like what's kind of screen they have, like what size are they viewing it in a thumbnail on like some marketplace, or are they have it printed, you know, on their whole wall, you know, like to make work that can be effective, you know, on all those different sizes and, you know, resolutions is challenging for sure. You know, you know, it's that's hard to do, right? Because it's very different on a thumbnail versus a, you know, a full wall of the detail that you'd be able to see, right?
I was actually really worried about that during the launch of Trichromatic because I thought they didn't work particularly well in thumbnails. I actually think you lose a huge amount of understanding of what the presence of each piece looks like. Because I mean, bear in mind that, you know, my reference point, my favorite reference point for them is I'm holding up a print for anyone on the podcast, is
Yeah.
this scale, right? It's
Yeah.
this visceral, like personal experience of being in front of this thing and getting that sensation of the texture and the detail and drawing you in and you wanting to move up to it closer. But your experience on a phone is so limited in comparison to
Yeah.
that. So limited. And so that was why I actually built, if you go on my website,
Yeah.
you don't have to go on it now, but there's a generator for Trichromatic on there where it gives you a really nice full screen experience that you can run on your phone or on your computer that kind of removes all of the extra noise that would normally sit around the work. So my hope was just that people would go there and get to kind of explore and play with the algorithm a little bit, kind of before it launched. And so essentially, if you go to Trichromatic there, and then it's I think there's just a button that says Explore on the next page. Yeah, so then you just get this Explorer, and you can save ones that you like. You know,
That's
you
great.
you can generate them, and it'll store them all into local storage on your phone. So when you load it back up again, you can replay the ones that you really liked, and you get a bit more of a opportunity to kind of explore and experience the breadth of the algorithm, which to me is one of the most special things about creating generative art.
Yeah, it's I love the perspective that you played with here too. Like, it's a really special part in addition to the color, the form, of that. Brings to mind kind of 100 Print by Ben Kovac. I don't know if you've seen his work, but
can I just say, I'm sorry, I'm very honored to hear you say that, because that is one of my all-time favorite pieces of generative artwork. Like, absolutely love that piece.
Yeah, I have one downstairs. I mean, like, it's amazing. Like, I think that if people see it in person, that's one that, like, doesn't translate as well, I think, on a screen, especially on a thumbnail. But like when you have that printed, and like in my living room downstairs, we have it, and you look at the fine details of that, it's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's killer. Honestly, like, Ben is one of my favorite artists. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And
yeah,
I will someday get a 100 print. I'm very annoyed that I
don't. That's the thing. You gotta get the print with it too. So you gotta like find somebody that's willing to sell the NFT and the print together.
Well, I think maybe Ben would do. I don't know. Maybe he's not doing reprints.
Maybe I don't know. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Like, that's one thing that I've gotten a little, I guess, frustrated with the how to pair those together and things like that. But anyways, I think we're up on the time limit here, so we'll end it here. But it's great to maybe just tell people before we end it, where are you going next? What's going, what's happening? What's the future? We talked about your past projects. Where are you going in the coming future?
I really appreciate that. I've got a release planned for the end of this year. It's a little bit different format. There's going to be a sort of gallery show around it, and yeah, I don't really want to say too much more because I've still got a lot of work to do on the piece.
But where can people follow you and so they can learn more about this and more about the when it comes out? Where would it be? Probably on your X profile. Do you have any other socials?
Just X really is the best place to follow me. I'm not an Instagram user. So yeah, similarly. X probably is the best place.
Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I still prefer Twitter. The logo was so much nicer too.
I know. Well, we know who made it. That's why. Martin.
Well,
so. But Anthony, thanks for coming on.
Dude, it was a pleasure. Thank you, man. I really enjoyed it.
We talked for a while and it didn't feel like it, so that's always a good sign when you
honestly,
I can't, with somebody.
Can't believe it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
we've been on for 2 hours.
Let's chat again.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like we could keep going. So this has been awesome. But we'll stop it here for this episode, and and I'll announce who we're gonna have on next week. Another great artist. So thank you so much again, Anthony, for joining and for going along on this little experiment with me. And hopefully people enjoy it and learning about you and your art. It's amazing and great. And, looking forward to seeing what you come out with next.
Thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure.
Take care.
Take care.